risen from the dead seems provocative. But all the Gospels are quite clear that the disciples saw Jesus as if he were alive. If Jesus did survive, it does not necessarily mean that the resurrection story was a hoax or a deliberate falsehood. At the end of the 19th century, the English writer Samuel Butler, in his book on the resurrection, came up with the theory that if Jesus had collapsed into a shock-induced coma on the cross and then recovered in the tomb, he and his disciples would actually have thought his recovery was a miraculous resurrection.
That still has great credibility if you see it in the light, for instance, of more contemporary development. Look at the near-death experience in the United States. Something like 13 million people in the United States say they've had near-death experiences. They've seen this white light. They believe it to be some form of miracle. So the idea that in the first century, when they had none of this scientific insight and they had none of these hospitals or whatever to save them, that people thought it, actually makes a lot of sense. Doesn't make them fraudsters or shysters. It actually makes them genuine people who thought they'd witnessed a miracle.
Whatever the circumstances, if Jesus was alive, then he and his disciples face a serious problem.
If Jesus was placed in the tomb and somehow was revived, he himself would certainly think that was an act of the grace of God. I came right to the bars of death and was brought back. But now there's a practical problem. It's a political problem, actually. Romans basically do one thing to messiahs. They crucify them.
If Jesus did indeed survive crucifixion, either through resurrection, as the Bible tells us, or more controversially, through resuscitation, then he is once more a condemned man. The Bible is said to solve this problem with a miracle called the Ascension. Jesus is taken bodily into heaven. But the interesting fact is that the Ascension does not actually appear in the original form of the Gospels. The Ascension references in Mark are among the verses which, as we've seen, were added 200 years later. There is one line in Luke which reads, "and was carried up into heaven." But again, this does not appear in all Bibles. It was in fact inserted, simply because the Ascension is referred to in a later book of the Bible, the Acts of the Apostles, and it's always been assumed that Luke was the author of the Acts. There's no Ascension in Matthew, and John's Gospel ends with the enigmatic words, "and there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that would be written." So what was it that Jesus did? One of the stories that emerges from this question depends upon the idea that Jesus' relationship with Mary Magdalene was a very special one.
If you read John's Gospel, the first person who saw the risen Christ, i.e. the first Christian, was Mary Magdalene. So I think when the church tries to sideline the idea that Jesus had relationships with women, that he had close relationships with women, it's laughable, really. I mean, it's part of this problem that they always say that that the thing that non-believers find hardest about Jesus was his divinity, and the thing that Christians always find hardest about Jesus was his humanity. I mean, he was a man. I'm perfectly happy with the concept that Jesus had a relationship with Mary Magdalene, that it was long and important and, was one of the dominant things in his life. He was human.
The idea, of course, that Jesus may have had a very special relationship with Mary may be offensive to many Christians, but some historians have gone even further. They've suggested that Jesus and Mary might have married, that they might even have had children. So if we're trying to find out where, in his flight from the Romans, Jesus could have gone, perhaps we should start by finding out where Mary went.